By the time the jets arrived, the men on the ground had learned not to count on them for long. A fast jet would scream in out of the sky, drop its bombs in a single pass and be gone again in seconds, climbing back up to altitude and away, leaving the soldiers below alone with whatever was still trying to kill them. They were magnificent machines. They were also, for a man pinned down in the jungle, almost heartbreakingly brief, and then sometimes a different sound would come over the trees, slower, lower. The heavy, growling drone of a big propeller engine that did not scream in and did not leave. A plane that looked like it belonged to the war before this one would settle into a slow circle overhead and simply stay there, hour after hour, putting its fire down exactly where it was needed and refusing to go home. That plane was the Douglas A-1 Skyraider. And the strangest thing about it is that, for the enemy on the ground, the smartest possible response to seeing it overhead was to do nothing at all. To hold your fire, stay perfectly still, and hope it had not already seen you. Now, there is a story that the North Vietnamese were under orders never to fire at this aircraft, and the title of this video plays on it. So let me be straight with you from the start, because honesty is the whole point of this channel. I have found no real evidence of a literal order like that, and we know for a fact that the enemy shot at these planes constantly because more than 100 of them were lost in combat. So this is not a story about an enemy memo. It is something more interesting than that. It is the story of an aircraft so tough, so patient, and so precise that not shooting at it became, for a soldier who wanted to live, simply the sensible thing to do. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why, and you are going to come away with a strange affection for one of the ugliest, oldest, most heroic machines of the entire war. To understand any of it, you have to start with the fact that this aircraft should not even have been there. The A-1 Skyraider was an anachronism, a glorious one. It was a propeller plane with a tailwheel, the last of its kind the United States Navy ever bought, designed all the way back in 1944 for a different war entirely. By the time it was fighting over Vietnam, the skies belonged to the jet age, to sleek supersonic fighters, and here was this big, heavy piston engine throwback rumbling along beneath them. The men who flew it and loved it called it the Spad, a nickname borrowed from a fighter of the First World War, because that is genuinely how old-fashioned it looked next to everything else in the sky. It was one of the largest single-engine aircraft ever built, and tucked into its nose was an enormous engine from the same family that powered the B-2 bomber. That huge engine is the key to the whole story, because it gave the Spad something almost nothing else in the sky had. It could carry a staggering load of bombs, rockets, and cannon, and it could haul all of it for a very long way and stay airborne for a very long time. And it turned out that in this particular war, in this particular kind of fight, those two old-fashioned qualities mattered more than speed ever could. Because here is what the Spad could do that the jets could not. It could stay. A jet fighter burns through its fuel at a frightening rate, especially down low. It has minutes over a target, sometimes only seconds of useful time, and then it has to leave. The Skyraider, with its big, thirsty engine but enormous fuel capacity and external tanks, could loiter over a single patch of ground for hours, by some accounts as long as 10 hours in the air. Think about what that meant to the people who needed it. Picture a small unit of soldiers surrounded in the jungle, or a pilot shot down behind enemy lines, hiding and praying, listening to the sky. A jet would come, do what it could in one screaming pass, and vanish, and the silence afterward was its own kind of despair. But when the Spad came, it did not leave. It circled and circled, and stayed overhead like a guardian that would not be moved, pouring down fire whenever the enemy showed himself, for as long as those men needed it to. The Skyraider was not the fastest aircraft in Vietnam, and it was nowhere near the most modern. It was something the men on the ground valued far more than either of those things. It was the one that did not abandon you, and it did not just stay. It was deadly accurate while it stayed. The Spad was stable and forgiving at low altitude and slow speed, able to fly slow enough to pick out a target on the ground that a screaming jet would blow straight past. Its pilots could place their bombs and rockets and cannon fire with a precision that is hard to believe, putting ordnance down within meters, in some cases within feet, of friendly soldiers or a downed airman. When you are the man on the ground and the enemy is that close, you do not want the fastest plane in the world dropping a bomb near you from high speed. You want the slow, steady old warbird that can see you, that can thread its fire into the gap between you and the people trying to kill you, and that will keep doing it until you are safe. That combination, the loiter and the precision, is the whole reason this obsolete aircraft became one of the most beloved machines of the war. But staying low and slow over a battlefield should, by every rule of air combat, get you killed. And this is where the second half of the Spad's legend comes in. because the aircraft was built like almost nothing else in the sky. It was, simply put, a flying tank. It carried armor plating around the cockpit and around its critical systems, and it could absorb a genuinely astonishing amount of punishment and keep flying. Skyraiders came home from missions riddled with bullet holes, with chunks torn out of their wings and fuselage, with damage that would have brought down a more delicate aircraft long before, and they landed, got patched up, and went out again. For an enemy soldier on the ground with a rifle or a light machine gun, this was the heart of the problem. You could hit the thing again and again, and it would not fall. And the most famous proof of just how formidable this old propeller plane was came in the air, not on the ground. On more than one occasion during the war, Skyraider pilots actually managed to shoot down enemy MiG jets. Sit with that for a second. A piston engine designed from 1944, the kind of plane the jet age had supposedly made obsolete, turned and fought a modern jet fighter and won. The old machine beat the new one. There are not many images in the whole war that capture the SPAD better than that. So now we can finally answer the question in the title, properly and honestly, and you will see why the legend exists, even though the literal order probably does not. Why would not firing at this aircraft be the smart move? Because of four things, all of them real, that stack on top of each other into a single, brutal conclusion. First, it was armored. If you opened up on it with the small arms most enemy soldiers carried, the rounds that hit it very likely would not bring it down. You would not get your kill. Second, it loitered. Unlike the jet that fired and fled, the SPAD was not going anywhere. It was going to be overhead for hours, which meant you would have to live in its presence for a long, long time. Third, it was precise. This was an aircraft specifically good at finding and hitting exactly the thing that had revealed itself. And fourth, and this is the one that ties the knot, the moment you fired at it, you gave away your position. You revealed exactly where you were to an armored, loitering, precise weapon that you almost certainly could not destroy, but that could very easily destroy you. Put those four facts together and the conclusion writes itself. Shooting at the Skyraider was a way to die for almost no chance of a reward. You did not need an order from your commanders to work that out. You needed it to happen to the man next to you once. The legend of the order never to fire is really just the folklore that grew up around a simple, deadly piece of battlefield logic. I want to pause here for a moment because aircraft like this one, and the men who flew them, get forgotten under all the faster, flashier machines, and the only way that changes is if you help. If the story of the ugly old warbird that refused to leave anyone behind is the kind of history you think more people should know, then stop right now and subscribe and leave the word SPAD in the comments. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm to carry this aircraft story to someone who has never heard of it. Do it now, because there is one role this plane played that captures everything it was, and it is the reason its pilots are still spoken of with awe. That role had a call sign, Sandy. When an American pilot was shot down over enemy territory, a desperate, dangerous operation would launch to get him back before the enemy closed in, and the Skyraiders were the heart of it. As the Sandy, the A-1 would go in low over the crash site, find the downed man, fight off the enemy closing in around him, and shepherd in the rescue helicopter, staying over that one vulnerable human being on the ground and daring anyone to come for him. It was exactly the kind of mission the SPAD was born for, the loiter, the toughness, the precision, all bent toward the single purpose of bringing one man home. And it produced moments that sound impossible. In one of the most famous, in the A Shau Valley in March of 1966, with a special forces camp being overrun by thousands of North Vietnamese, a Skyraider pilot put his aircraft down onto a wrecked, debris-strewn airstrip in the middle of the battle, under fire, simply to pick up a fellow pilot who had been shot down and had no other way out. He pulled the man into his cockpit and flew them both out through the gunfire. It earned him the Medal of Honor. But notice what made it possible. Not just the courage, though there was plenty of that. It was the aircraft. Only a machine this tough, this stable, this able to get low and slow and survive, could even have attempted it. The heroism belonged to the men, but the plane was what let them try. And here is the honest other half of that, the part this channel will always include, because it is the truth. The Skyraider was not invincible. Far from it. In a low-threat environment, against an enemy with only rifles, it was close to the perfect weapon. But Vietnam was not always a low-threat environment. As the war went on, the enemy ringed his most important areas with heavy anti-aircraft guns, rapid-firing cannon that could tear even an armored SPAD out of the sky in an instant. Flying that slow, that low, that patiently, over guns like those took a kind of courage that is hard to put into words. Because the very things that made the SPAD so valuable, its slowness and its willingness to stay, also made it a target that could be tracked and hit. More than 100 of these aircraft were lost in combat over the course of the war. That is the real tension of the Skyraider, and it is a better story than any tale of invincibility. It was the toughest close support aircraft in the sky, and flying it into the worst places was still often a death sentence. The men who climbed into that cockpit knew both of those things were true at once, and they went anyway. The SPAD was eventually retired, and in hindsight a lot of people came to believe it was retired too soon, that the Air Force had been too eager to throw away an old propeller plane in love with the jet age, because the idea the Skyraider proved did not die with it. The notion that a slow, heavily armored, hard-hitting aircraft that could loiter over a battlefield and protect the men on the ground was worth more than raw speed lived on. You can see its direct descendant flying today in the A-10 Warthog, a modern aircraft built around exactly the same philosophy. An ugly, blood-flying tank designed to do the one thing the SPAD did better than anything else. Stay low, stay over the troops, soak up punishment, and refuse to leave. That is the real legacy of the A-1 Skyraider. Not that it was unbeatable, because it was not, but that it understood something the faster, sleeker aircraft never quite could, that for the man trapped on the ground, the most important quality in the sky is not speed, it is the willingness to stay. But the Skyraider had an enemy of its own, the one thing that could reliably bring it down, and it is the reason more than 100 of them never came home. As the war went on, the skies over the enemy's most vital supply routes became the deadliest place a pilot could fly, a gauntlet of guns waiting in the hills, hunting the slow and the low. Who built that wall of fire, how it turned whole stretches of sky into a killing ground, and what it was like to fly into it anyway is a story all its own, and it is the one we are telling next. Because if the Skyraider was the guardian that would not leave, it is time you met the thing that was waiting to make it pay.